Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 207 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to discuss the concept of sweeping the sheds, which was a concept introduced in the book Legacy, about the culture transformation of the New Zealand All Blacks, which is obviously a highly successful rugby team. If you follow rugby, you would know that already. Now, I want to discuss the pros and cons of this sweeping the sheds approach and get into what it might mean for your leadership. So let's get into that topic right now. So recently I read the book Legacy, which is about the culture transformation of the highly successful rugby team, which is the New Zealand All Blacks, which I alluded to in the intro there. Now, discussed in the book is this concept of sweeping the sheds, which is something the All Blacks prided themselves on, especially at this time when the book was written anyway. Now, in practical terms, this referred to senior players in the dressing room cleaning up after the game, rather than leaving it to other more junior people or the cleaning staff. So at its core, sweeping the sheds to me means not being too important for the little things that need to be done. No matter how senior, important or well paid you are, you need to have the humility to get stuck into the small tasks too. And another part of this sweeping the sheds concept was the respect that it showed to the playing group and respect for the game and the facilities. So the senior players would sweep the sheds so they're cleaning up, rather than leaving it to other people to show that respect for the game and the team that they play for. So is getting stuck into the small tasks like this good leadership? So people often raise the concept of sweeping the sheds, I find, and it's generally applauded on social media as an amazing display of leadership. You know, you'll see those posts on social media where everyone likes it and there's 1,000 comments saying this is so amazing. But as usual, there's a bit of a counterpoint to all this. There's a few reasons why getting stuck into the smaller tasks like this may not be a great idea. In fact, considering yourself too important for this type of work might actually be a good thing in certain situations. So let's have a look at another point of view in a work environment. Obviously, the concept raised in the book Legacy was about a professional sporting team, so the context is a little bit different there. Now, if you're in a leadership role, you're generally being paid more than the people who work for you. And it stands to reason that you're paid more because you have more responsibility and higher level aspects to consider within your role. So is it a good idea to be doing the smaller jobs when you could be focusing on something else? Now this speaks to the concept of opportunity cost. The opportunity cost says that when you choose to do something, you're missing out on the chance to focus on something else. So saying yes to something usually means saying no to another opportunity. So earlier in my career, I once chose to take on some lower level tasks within my team because I didn't want to distract my team members with them. Now I found out later that this had actually annoyed a team member because they took pride in taking the burden of those tasks off me. Now when I did that work instead, they felt like they were letting me down. Now in the literal example of sweeping the sheds, I wonder if the stadium cleaning team is actually annoyed because someone else is doing their job. Sometimes taking on tasks that your team should be doing can hurt, especially if they take pride in their work. So that's something to consider as well. So the real topic here is, what's the right balance? I've found that it's never good to be seen as too important for something, even in a leadership role. But it seems that you might be damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you delegate the menial tasks to a team member, you may look like you're too important for the work. Take these tasks on and people may question why you're spending your valuable time when you could be doing something more important. So what do we do here? When is it a good idea to get stuck into these lesser tasks, or so-called lesser tasks, as a leader? And are there times when you should leave it to somebody else? So my thoughts on this are that when a task is infrequent or a one-off event, it can be good to get stuck in and help out. It certainly can help to build trust and respect when you show others that you are willing to do the work. And in a previous episode a while back, I talked about the trust equation from a company called Trusted Advisor. And the bottom line of that equation, and one of the factors that erodes trust the most, is what's called self-orientation. So basically, the appearance that you are in it for yourself or doing things to further your own needs at the expense of others. So helping out like this on some of the smaller tasks can be a great trust builder because it looks like you're reducing that self-orientation aspect. Now, if you're dealing with an emergency, a staff shortage, or other unusual circumstances, it's also a good opportunity to take on the work. These events generally fall into the category of being infrequent, so there is some overlap in both of these situations. It wouldn't look good if you stood by and watched while your team was overloaded when you could have stepped in and given a hand. And lastly, I think it can also be okay to take on the smaller tasks when it doesn't form part of your normal work routine. For example, if you finish for the day and you decide to empty the dishwasher in the kitchen, that's a nice way to help out after hours. But if you're doing that in the middle of a busy workday, people might start to question your priorities. So helping out in a time of crisis can be a great way to build trust. And when there's a staff shortage or other issue, I'd say it's great leadership to get yourself involved. I think it starts to become a problem when your resourcing issue, in that example, becomes an ongoing problem. If you're always called upon to help out, you might be sweeping the sheds a little too often. And in this case, I'd say good leadership is helping out temporarily and then making a case for more resources to sustain your business operation for the longer term. Now, I've got a friend who owns an engineering business, and he told me a story that one day his office had a huge plumbing problem, and there were some blockages causing sewage to flood the car park. And quick action was required, and he decided to get in and do the dirty work, quite literally in this case, to fix the problem while help was arriving, rather than delegating this very messy task to people in his team. Now, it certainly wasn't a pleasant task, and it may definitely have been below his pay grade, but he may just have gained some great credibility and respect for his efforts. And when I asked him about his thought process going into that decision, like why did he choose to do it rather than delegate that, he actually said he just couldn't stand the thought of forcing his team members to get in and do that work that they weren't actually required to do, and he was much happier to take that work on himself. So I thought that was an interesting example of what you might call sweeping the sheds in that situation. So there's a few warning signs I would look for when lesser tasks start to take up too much of your workday. Because sweeping the sheds is great, but I don't think it's a great use of a leader's time in a workplace setting if it's done too often. So the first thing I'd look for is if you're starting to frequently engage in lesser tasks as part of your normal daily routine, this might be a sign that you should delegate them to somebody else. And second, if you start to work on these lesser tasks because you find them more satisfying than your actual work, this could be a sign of a motivation problem. And it's good to remember that as a leader, you are the only one who can do certain types of work based on the role and the position that you hold and the experience that you have. So it's good to remember that when you're focusing on lesser tasks that other people could possibly do, you are taking yourself away from work that you can only do. And so those might really be your top priorities. Now, sometimes leaders aren't sure how to forward plan and struggle to focus on the bigger picture, and this can mean they have a tendency to get pulled into the detailed work. Now, if this sounds like you, it may be a good idea to revisit your task list and key priorities. It can be helpful to start thinking at a higher level for your team. So there's some articles that might be useful in the show notes page about creating a team operating model, creating a clear team purpose, and 5 strategic skills to improve your leadership. They will be in the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/207. And while you're on that page, if you think a coaching session with me might be beneficial for your leadership, I'd encourage you to apply for your complimentary coaching session. And I can't coach everyone, but if you don't apply, we'll never know. So the link will be there on the show notes page to do that as well, thoughtfulleader.com/207. So as with many aspects of leadership, there is no single right way to do things. Some situations will require us to adjust our approach, and what works in one environment may not work in another. Sometimes being too important to sweep the sheds can be a good thing because you're placing a higher value on your time. But at other times, you may want to pick up the broom to build trust and rapport within your team. So you've got to find that right balance. And if you're dealing with a team where you think there's some trust issues and you'd like to build a better working relationship with your team members, then you might start to look at sweeping the sheds, as it's called, a little more often to get a bit closer to the team and show that you're pitching in and not above that work. But you might find that if you do that over and over again, some team members will start to lose that respect for you because they see you focusing on lesser tasks that other people could be doing. So it's a fine balancing act. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What do you think about this concept of sweeping the sheds? When do you do it? And when do you stop yourself from doing it? Leave a comment on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/207. I'd love to see what you think about this topic. I've also left a link to that book, Legacy, about the culture transformation of the All Blacks rugby team on the show notes page as well. So check that one out. That's a really good read and quite interesting about how they turned that culture around. Thank you once again for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you have a few minutes, I would love it if you could leave a positive review for the Thoughtful Leader podcast. If you like the podcast, that is, of course. You can find a link to do that on the show notes page, or you can simply leave a review or a star rating in your podcast app of choice. Okay, thank you once again for listening. Keep up the thoughtful leadership. Take care of yourselves and your team, and I'll be back next week.